Howdy everybody, how you doing today? I'm Mr. Bob, your neighborhood naturalist, Bob Langston from the North Carolina Zoo. We're out here on an absolutely lovely autumn day. You can see the leaf cover behind me that's on the ground. I'll get into more reasons why I choose, I'll use that term, to leave those leaves on the ground. But we're going to stop for a second. And coming up this week is we're coming into the Thanksgiving and ultimately into the end of the year holidays. And so I thought I might share something with you, some thoughts on how to capture nature. Now, I don't mean necessarily in traps or in any sort of snare or anything like that. No, we're talking about capturing images, photographs. And in this particular instance, I'm referring to digital photographs. I started taking pictures and working in photography long time ago. And when I was in high school and used to work with some kind of old school equipment, all on film. When digital technology got to be much more affordable, it gave me the opportunity, well, to share these videos with you, but also it gave me the opportunity to sort of reevaluate and take a look at some different types of equipment. So I'll kind of start with some basic things and work up like that. A lot of photography is less in the equipment as it is in your eyes. And when you first start off, many people, not all, but many people do get a little frustrated because what you see out here, that bird, that insect, that lovely flower, that sunset, what your eyes see is not necessarily what the camera sees. So it does take quite a bit of practice and repeated use in order to get to the point where you can either compensate for that or you understand the difference so that you can get a really great image. Years ago at North Carolina, University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, photography was actually taught as a physics class. And it was a combination of physics, optics, and there's a lot of math that I'm not going to get into. But it's also taught as chemistry because in the film days, we actually had to go through the chemical process of developing film. We don't have that issue now. With digital, a lot of it is importing, getting it into a computer, a camera, onto a shared basis. How do you keep people from stealing your own pictures and things like that? I won't get too much into the copyright issues or anything, but let's talk about image capture. When I was at Carolina, I had a professor. His name was Dr. Ross Scroggs. And Ross had this thing. Somebody would ask him sometimes, what's the best camera to use for a wedding? What's the best camera to use for capturing sports? What's the best camera to use for capturing nature? And his answer was somewhat tongue-in-cheek. He would often look at us and go, well, the best camera to use is the one you have with you. And for most of us, that's where we start. And I'm referring to our cell phones. Most of our cell phones these days have some pretty good cameras. We're always with us. You know, pretty much all the time we have one hanging on our belt and stuff. So a lot of times it's just a simple matter of practicing with your eye. Now, mine in particular is an Android, and one of the problems is sometimes with a real high-resolution image, it actually gets compressed into a low-resolution image before I can post it somewhere, before I can send it somewhere. So that gets to be a challenge sometimes. Other phones probably don't have that particular issue. Mine just happens too. Something to mention. As humans, we tend to think a lot in terms of volume. Bigger is always better. And we often measure our camera resolutions in terms of megapixels. And megapixels are just the number of dots, or the little squares on your screen that the camera can actually pick up. Some cameras have high resolution, some cameras have low resolution. But I learned a long time ago that a camera that shoots at 2 megapixels that has a large sensor and a great lens can often capture an image better than a cell phone that has 16 or 20 megapixels. And here's why. The sensor, the item inside the camera, and I'll just use my phone here as an example. The sensor is we'll think of it as the film of the camera. It's where the image is transferred from a visual image, in this case, into an electronic image that's actually stored somewhere in the camera. This is a tiny unit. It's very, very small. The camera is only part of what it does. So in this particular case, the sensor is very small. It's probably, I don't know, it's probably like half the size of my little fingernail there, even smaller. It's a very small sensor. So in some cases, that small sensor, you can pack a lot of megapixels into it, but sometimes you still don't get just the best resolution. So your next step up is one that I often can carry in a shirt pocket. And this is one that I have used for many, many years, which is super duper basic. It's just a little Fuji. I'll use this one. I call this one a little pocket camera. Years ago, I worked with a newspaper editor who used to refer to these as PhD cameras, which means push here, dummy. And don't let that get too negative on you or anything like that. But these are called point and shoot cameras. You can stick one in your shirt pocket. It doesn't have quite as crisp of an image as some do. I do like Fuji lenses, and you'll see that in just a minute or two as well. These are great, among other things. The batteries in here, these use just plain old AA batteries. I happen to have rechargeable ones in here right now, but that's the other issue. You can go into a convenience store anywhere in the world and find AA batteries. Probably not some of the specialized batteries you can get for some cameras. So the specialized batteries have an advantage, though. They often last longer as far as more shots per battery charge. So that's one of the options. One of the things you want to look at, too, is your memory card. And that's this little item right here. Fuji's, sometimes, some of their cameras can be really, really finicky. They work best with Fuji branded cards. These days, most cameras use a card like this, which is an SD card, or in this case, this one's a micro SD card and an adapter. They use an SD card that clicks into the little pocket there. I've had older cameras that often, there were some that were used an XD card. They're kind of obsolete. One of my favorites for a long time was an older Olympus camera that used what was called smart media cards. And smart media cards were really thin, like a credit card. They were wafer thin. But the biggest ones you could get were 128 megabits. This one is 4 gigabytes. And so it's much, much larger card. So these are great. You can stick them in a shirt pocket. You don't have to worry about them. I've had them with me sometimes when I just had no other camera, and all of a sudden it was like, oh my gosh, there's that odd circumstance where I have the chance to take a picture that's very unique, capture it now, and that's what I would do. So I kind of have a love for these. I like them when I'm doing things like outdoor activities, litter pickups. They're great. Stick them in your pocket and go. The kind of next step up from those, and by the way, one of the cool things to bring this up is quite often you're going to run into somebody who's a little bit like me, that's kind of for a better way of putting it, a gear junkie, and has lots of stuff. And quite often, I have actually handed some of this stuff down to the next generation of folks just so that they could have the opportunity to practice this skill. And the next ones are a little bit more advanced. Sometimes these are called bridge cameras and things like that, a little bit larger. This, again, is another Fuji. This one's covered in dirt because I had it out in the woods not long ago. In this particular case, this is an S2000, something like that. Fuji, they have a whole bunch in that series that are like that. Again, I like Fuji lenses. As you go up here, one of the things you gain is the fact that you have a lot longer lens. And lens is a big deal. The longer lens basically means that you have the ability to capture an image crisply and farther away. And the problem is when you have this extended, this one is what's called an 18x zoom. I have some that are larger. The problem is when you have this extended, if you're out at night, you probably are going to have a tough time getting an image because the longer the lens is, the smaller the lens opening gets. It's called the aperture, that allows it to capture a lot of light. Now, there's some other things that come into play. And the way that the sensitivity is coded was the number. It's called an ISO number, and it's usually from like 64 to up to about 32,000. And the larger the number, the more light sensitive it is. But the problem is it means that it has to combine pixels. So at night you'll get a picture that looks a little bit grainy or not quite as clear. But again, I like these. This one has a view screen on the back. This is about a 3-inch square view screen. It's pretty good. It's pretty light. I always like to get mine that have this particular option too. So you have an eye-level viewfinder. This one's not an optical viewfinder, meaning you're not looking through the lens. You're looking at a very small screen. And this is just old school habit of mine of being able to use this like a conventional, film 35 millimeter camera. The other thing that it does for you is in low light, when you're outside and it's a bright, sunny day, the view screen on the back is sometimes hard to see. And so, you can go that way. They have all kinds of different features and things of that sort. For years, however, this was kind of my workhorse. This is a Nikon P100, and it has a kind of a long lens. It's a 26 that multiplies itself 26. That means from here until it's fully extended is 26 times. And typically, zooms are measured in terms of the amount they can extend and retract. Basically, it's the length of the lens. It often is measured in millimeters, or you'll be given what's called a 35 millimeter equivalent. Now, this camera is really kind of cool. It does a couple of cool things. One thing it does is that the view screen in the back tips up. It doesn't swing out. It does tip up. And that means that if you have this down at the ground level and you're trying to catch bees, you can actually look at this one without having to get your face right down here on the dirt. The Nikon does not use AA batteries. It uses a proprietary battery like this. And this is one of those places where we get into an argument. And I said, if you talk to some people, they'll almost insist, oh, no. You have to carry the Nikon. It's a better camera. It's got a better lens. And sometimes I argue and I say, no, I'm going to take my Fuji because where we're going is way the heck out in the boonies, number one. And if I absolutely have to, the great thing about the Fuji, it uses AA batteries. If you look in here, you can see those. I have rechargeables in here right now. Sometimes they don't last as long as the others do. But so that's an option. Do you use what's called a proprietary battery, or do you use a little one that can actually use AA batteries? I kind of have a preference for both, but I can't make up my mind. So I have a handful of these that use AA batteries. I have a handful that use proprietary batteries. Here's your very first nature photography tip. If you're going out and it's going to be getting late in the day or at night, carry a flashlight. This one is a little bitty LED mag light, and one of the reasons I like it is it's very small, but it's also very bright. The reason why: these have an autofocus feature. Most of them you can't manually focus if you're using what's called a bridge or a little bit more higher grade consumer camera. These are actually easy to use, but there's a sensor. It's right up here. And this is the sensor that actually sends out a little infrared red dot of light that helps the lens focus. If it's really dark or if you're shooting far away, sometimes it can't find it, so all your images come out fuzzy. I learned this trying to get a picture of a barred owl across the street from my house years ago, but I just take a flashlight, turn it on, and when you have the camera up here, I'll often do it this way, so that I have in my left hand, I have the flashlight aimed at the image. That helps this camera find the image and helps it focus. It's not just that camera either. It works with a lot of different ones. So if you get really, really into it and everything else, you might want to even go better. This is just a more modern version of the P100. This one's actually a P500. And one of the great things about it, it still has the articulating articulating screen. The newer ones, the 600 series, the screen flips out so you can face it forward. So if you're doing a timed exposure or if you're shooting video, you can actually see yourself, your face in your screen. That's kind of it. This one also has a very, very long lens. And the long lenses are kind of one of the big points of discussion for a lot of these. We're going to extend this out here so you can see how long that telephoto gets and things like that. Problem is that these can be a little sensitive. If you drop the camera with the lens exposed, chances are something in the mechanism here is going to go bad, and camera either has to be repaired or it's no good anymore. So these can be a bit of an issue like that. This one does use the same SD cards, and I think I use some pretty large SD cards. This one's a 32 megabyte card. Some older cameras can't take SD cards that big. Some newer ones can, and you just have to get used to your camera, read the owner's manual, and everything else. Now, if there are several different types of interchangeable lens cameras, and as you go, again, I said that the sensor in my cell phone is tiny. The one that's in the Fuji here, and probably in both of my Nikons, oops, and the one that's in both of my Nikons is probably about the size of my pinky fingernail right there. That's it. So a little bit bigger. That means that if you have 14 megapixels here versus 14 megapixels in my cell phone, this is going to have a better image. From there, you get into single lens reflex cameras. Now, the newest, most sort of highly evolved technology for a lot of interchangeable lens cameras are what are called mirrorless. This actually does have a mirror that reflects what comes into the lens. It's reflected on a mirror that comes up to the viewfinder. So this actually does have an optical viewfinder. It means that when you're looking through the lens, you're not using the screen in the back to focus. You're actually having to use the eyepiece. Some of the newer ones have the ability to use what's called live focus. It's a slower way to work the camera. But these are kind of nice. Now, this one is a Pentax. I've been using Pentax equipment since I was in high school. And again, one of the reasons I genuinely love this camera is that if you have to, it uses a proprietary battery, but you can also I have an adapter that uses AA batteries. So if I'm somewhere in the world and I need to get batteries, I can. Here's an example. Many years ago, I was in South Africa, and I carried 2 cameras. An itty-bitty little camera like this that I could stick in my shirt pocket that used AA batteries, and I had a Canon single lens reflex that used proprietary batteries. At no place in South Africa could we find an outlet with an adapter that I could actually use to charge the batteries for the Canon. So I took most of my pictures with the smaller camera. That's just the way it went. Now these are interchangeable lens cameras. I'll show you. This has a little button here, and this lens can come off. And I have several different lenses depending on what I need to do. This one is quite good for long distance, but then again, you have to change them, which is one of the reasons why when you're deciding what you want in the way of a camera. Do I want one that is going to have interchangeable lenses that'll have the largest sensor that's going to have the most features packed into it, or do I want to get one that's going to have a great lens, but it's probably not going to have, this is much, much lighter than this one is. The Nikon here, this is a very, very light camera. Light is sometimes good, sometimes bad. If you got to carry it a long way, it's great. If you're trying to hold it steady, heavy is good because it takes more energy to move it. So again, that's the choice. I was having a discussion with one of the guys down at the zoo one day. If you're going to travel internationally, do you want to take an all-in-one camera that has a really long lens, or especially if you're having to pay per weight on your baggage, do you want to take the camera, the chargers, all this other stuff so you have all these tools at hand? That's kind of up to you. There's no hardcore answer on that. You have to figure which one you like better. Typically, the single lens reflexes can often be a little bit faster. This one has an ISO rating. It goes up as high as 3200, which means that it's pretty good in low light situations. It's also, as I said, this one has little rubber gaskets, so it's not waterproof, but it is what we call mist resistant. So if I happen to be out in the early morning and the sun's not up and there's a little light rain falling, I don't have to sweat too much with that one. There's other options as well. This one again is an old Olympus, and this is one of the E series that they had. This one's an E420, and it is tiny as single lens reflexes go. It's hard to see. and probably hard to understand what tiny means when you're looking at them and they look almost the same size. They're not almost the same size. The Olympus is much, much lighter. It's much smaller. It fits much lighter in your hand. There's several reasons why. The Pentax on this side, the Pentax has up in here a prism, a big chunk of glass that helps you focus. It directs the light from the lens up here. It turns it right side up so that what you see is what you're looking at the lens. Instead of having a prism, the Olympus actually has what's called a series of mirrors, or a pentamirror. So there are several little mirrors up here in this part of the camera that do the same thing the prism does. They're much lighter. What's the advantage? Lighter. What's the disadvantage? If you drop this or give it a hard knock, the mirrors can come unglued, and again, you either have to pay a lot of money to get it repaired, or it becomes a little bit less useful. Some of these are not particularly, folks don't necessarily like them because the latches on the card door sometimes break off. This one has 2 card slots. So up in here, if you can see, it has the ability to use an SD card, or an XD card rather, or it can use an old school compact flash card. Compact flash cards are kind of the industry standard for a lot of high-end stuff. So I mentioned a couple of accessories. I mentioned your flashlight and some carrying bags, cases and things like that, battery chargers and stuff. Our other best friend is a tripod. They don't have to be expensive. I think I paid $12 for this one, and it may have $10 shipped or something like that. It's an old Seikar. It's just something to hold your camera steady. I got some absolutely delightful pictures earlier in the summer that were bees feasting on the clover in my backyard. I'll see if I can work one in here. And that one of the great things about that particular ability was I had the camera on a tripod so that I didn't have to worry about my hands shaking. If I was laying on the ground, if I inhale and exhale, it wasn't a big problem. So, photography. The reason why I mention it right now, as we come into the winter, we're coming up on several different bird counts. It's a great opportunity to get outside. The weather is nice. It's wonderful to get outdoors. And since the trees don't have as much leaf cover on them as they used to, it's much, much easier to spot birds. So you need to be able to see them with your unaided eye before you can find them in the viewfinder of a camera. A lot of folks are going to visit family and stuff like that. It's great to have one of these in hand just so you can capture a memory or two. I will share a funny story. Not long ago, I was doing a work project on a Saturday, and there were 3 of us, and we wanted to get a picture of the 3 of us in the group. So we just grabbed somebody off the street and asked them if they could use this camera to capture our picture. And she looks at it, she's looking around trying to figure out which button to push, and she goes, "Oh my gosh, I haven't used one of these since middle school." So by all rights, even though I use this as a regular basis, this is old school technology. So most folks these days are far more well versed with what to do with their cell phones. You know where to touch the screen, how to zoom it, how to focus, and everything else. Again, best camera to use, the one you have with you. So please make sure you carry something when you go outdoors and you explore nature. I often mention as a naturalist that I'm not an expert in natural history, but I'm a student of natural history. Likewise, I'm not an expert in photography. I'm a student of photography. And there are many, many things that I discover every day, and I'm like, whoa, I didn't know the camera could do that. Had I been a smart guy and read the manual, I probably would have figured it out, but I get bored on those things. So anyway, a little bit about the zoo. Coming up here the first 2 weekends in December, we do have several special holiday features that are called the Believe events. If you'd like to find out some information on those, please visit our website at www.nczoo.org. That will take you in, and you can find out about special events that are upcoming, anything that comes up that we might have to cancel, or anything like that. We are still on limited admissions, meaning that you will need to purchase tickets in advance. You will need to reserve an entry time. And those are all, you can make all of those arrangements on the website, and that's a great opportunity. So as we are moving on into the cooler months of the year, I'm Mr. Bob, your neighborhood naturalist, And we're going to start to change our focus a little bit, sometimes from flowers to some other things that happen out here in nature in the wintertime. So please join me again in about 2 weeks for another episode of the Neighborhood Naturalist. Again, Mr. Bob, your Neighborhood Naturalist. I'm Bob Langston with the North Carolina Zoo. Thank you very much for letting me spend a little time with you today. And come on and see us. The weather's beautiful. The animals are active. It's www.nczoo.org. Y'all take care, and I will see you again next time. Bye now.